Some public service announcements out of the way first. Apologise if I sound a little off. I am sick, but I didn't want to just leave it and upload nothing. I really do enjoy making these videos, and for the most part, it seems like you guys enjoy watching them as well. As always, if you do enjoy this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you don't enjoy it and want to leave a Vatnik moment in the comments, please also do that. I genuinely enjoy those too. Oh, and join our Discord. It'll be in the pinned comment. Have you ever worked in an office? Like a really small one, specifically run by an executive team that is technologically illiterate. Your computers are usually about 20 years old at best, and the monitors are weirdly square and have this funny looking aspect ratio. You can genuinely usually see the pixels on screen as well, and in general you just sort of wonder how the hell it hasn't burnt down yet. Now take that feeling, multiply it by 52,000 tons, and add in a hefty dose of compensation, and you're approaching the territory inhabited by the most horrific machines ever created by the Soviet Union. The aircraft carriers. I have written this introduction about 6 times. Truth be told, I really just didn't know where to start. The Admiral Kuznetsov, that floating hell, well, many videos of it exist, and they talk about it and why it's particularly horrific. The thing is though, when you're making a video about something that is horrifically shit, you have to ask yourself a very important question. Where the fuck do I start? And for that reason, I've opted to start at the beginning of Soviet naval aviation. The Mosfar. No, not that one. That one. The Mosfar and the Leningrad were a pair of helicopter carriers laid down during the 60s, and were truly the first proper foray into naval aviation by the Soviet Navy. At this point in history, the Soviet Navy truly had a decision that it needed to make. Would it A. focus on a defensive navy, understanding that it will never be able to get supremacy against Western naval forces outside maybe the Baltic Sea, or B. enter into a dick-measuring contest that it could never hope to afford? I will let you figure out which one they chose. Just keep those 2 points in mind throughout this video. The Mosfar and the Leningrad, the 2 ships in this class, and they were built as with basically every major ship in the Mykolaiv shipyard in the Ukrainian SSR. Now, originally 12 of these ships were planned as flotilla leaders for submarine hunters, but honestly on par for the course for Soviet and Russian shipbuilding, they plan a lot but never actually build it. Now this is partially due to the fact that these ships handled about as well as Aeroflot handles passenger safety. So, yeah. And instead of ironing out the kinks, they just simply cancelled the idea. That said, these 2 horrifically ugly, and I mean horrifically ugly ships, were quite a smart decision by Soviet High Command, at least in theory. Being relatively smaller and not attempting to compete against the Western carriers, but being able to deploy choppers to destroy submarines. Defend the ports, perfectly sane idea. The idea was promptly scrapped, and the Kiev class was planned and laid down. Now this is usually the point where tankies or wannabe tankies, also known as Trotskyists who never got the chance to run over people in tanks, bring up the Montreux Convention, saying that the design had to be this way because otherwise they would be stuck in the Black Sea. To that I bring up the Ulyanovsk. Didn't stop them planning and starting to build that, did it? Now the Kievs. These things were actually a product of the Soviet government desperately trying to cut corners on paying for an actual aircraft carrier. This will come as no shock to people here, I am sure. I have seen particular groups of people online rant about how these carriers were actually the best, because they could do many roles. You know, that whole jack of all trades kind of thing that Laserpig actually touched on in his T-14 Armada video. And it's true, they could launch a lot of missiles, and they could also carry aircraft. The USS Kitty Hawk, the US equivalent of this period, couldn't launch that many missiles, no. But the Kitty Hawk could have that many aircraft in the air that it could sink your battle group before you even knew you were in the same time zone as it. So, yeah, jack of all trades, it's a nice theory, but in a naval sense, it's something you do when you're trying to save money. It's not something you do when you're actually trying to build a good navy. The general idea of the Kievs was to power project, defend against submarines, and to provide air support. This sort of worked, and truth be told, I have a soft spot for these ships. I think they look quite cool. But their planes, the Yak-38, those things were just death traps. And they killed multiple pilots. The Yak-38 tended to quite literally just fall from the sky. And it's somewhat telling, and the reason they gave for this was so they could hold larger payloads. But the moment they could, the Yak-38s were stopped from being able to use their VTOL capability, and instead they used a short takeoff capability. So, make from that what you will. Now, during the first deployment of this class, funnily enough, only 6 Yak-38s were even operable. So the Soviets, to look stronger than they actually are, painted different numbers on the planes below deck to make it look like they had more in the hangars. This ruse worked, in part at least in the press, with some magazines reporting that the things could carry up to 60 aircraft. Whether NATO navies knew about it, well, we won't know. The Soviets built 3 of the Kiev class, and 1 additional ship to a slight variation known as the Baku subclass. This is again another common thing that the Soviet Navy and Russian Navy does, is they build one design, and they'll build probably half a dozen or so of that design. And then they'll build a slightly revised design. It'll still fall under that subgroup, but it'll be completely different. I mean, look at the Krivak class frigates. Like, a Krivak 1 and a Krivak 5 are completely different ships, yet they all fall under the Krivak subgroup. It's a weird thing you'll get used to with Soviet naval jargon, essentially, and how they handle their ship classes, so it's just something to be aware of. It's quite interesting. The ships that were built were the Kiev, the Minsk, the Novorossiysk, and the Baku. Unfortunately, these ships were plagued by maintenance issues throughout their existence, and honestly, as were all Soviet large ships. In the case of Novorossiysk, she had such a bad fire in her engine rooms that she was scrapped in Pohang, South Korea shortly after the fall of the Union. She was just not worth trying to fix. Weirdly enough, the first 2 ships, Kiev and Minsk, are now a theme park exhibit and a luxury hotel in China. Because that's what you do with an old clapped out Soviet aircraft carrier when you're done with it. You make it into a theme park. You know what? I can't fault it. I would if I could. I absolutely would if I could. The last ship in the class, Baku, is now the INS Vikramaditya. It's Indian. It's in the Indian Navy, and it's got the prefix INS, and it starts with a V. How she got there is quite a funny tale, and it's a good indicator of, well, what the Russian Navy is like, and Russia in general. So the deal of a lifetime.
The worst trade deal ever made.
Baku entered service in 1987 and then was renamed Admiral Gorshkov in 1991. She was then deactivated in 1996 because she was too expensive to operate on a post-Cold War budget. India at this time was looking for a way to expand its carrier aviation capabilities. And on the 20th of January 2004, after years of negotiation, Russia and India signed off on a deal for the ship. The ship itself would be free, while India would pay US $800 million for the upgrade and refit of the vessel, and an additional $1 billion US for the aircraft and weapon systems. The deal also included the purchase of 12 single-seat MiG-29Ks and 4 dual-seat MiG-29K UBs, with an option for 14 more aircraft. The total cost, US $1 billion, yeah, that was not going to last. Further to this, there would be 6 camera of Ka-31 Helix reconnaissance and anti-submarine helicopters, torpedo tubes, missile systems, and RD units. It was the works. The carrier was going to get refitted for them. The immense upgrade involved stripping all weaponry and missile launcher tubes from the ship's foredeck, converting the Gorshkov from a hybrid carrier-cruiser into a pure through-deck aircraft carrier. The announced delivery date for the INSV was August 2008. Allowing the carrier to enter service just as the light carrier, the INS Virat, retired, Virat being the former HMS Hermes of Falklands fame. She would then have her life extended. Now the delays would begin. Issues were compounded by ongoing cost overruns, leading to high-level diplomatic exchanges between India and Russia. India finally agreed to pay an additional $1.2 billion for the project, doubling the cost just to get the bloody thing done on time. However, ongoing difficulty with the delivery schedule pushed the expected delivery back to 2013. In July 2008, Russia reportedly needed to increase the price by $2 billion, blaming the unexpected cost overruns on the deteriorated condition of the ship, and citing a market price for a new aircraft carrier of $4 billion. Mind you, the carrier was laid down in the 70s, and Russia here was simply grifting the Indians for more money. Russia proceeded to threaten to cancel the deal entirely if India did not pay the increased amount. On the 7th of December 2009, Russian sources indicated final terms had been agreed on, but no delivery date had been set. On the 8th of December 2009, India and Russia were reported to have ended the stalemate over the Admiral Gorshkov price deal by agreeing on a price of $2.2 billion. Moscow had asked for $2.9 billion for the carrier, nearly 3 times what was originally agreed upon by the two sides in 2004. In April 2009, a scandal over the project proceeded to emerge when it came out that a senior Indian Navy officer had been blackmailed to influence the situation and negotiations over the Gorshkov's sale to India. Because of course he had, because this is Russia. I'm just going to ignore his first name. Commodore Singh had been a senior figure supervising the refit of the carrier, working as the principal director of the project in Russia. He was discharged from service for this incident. Remind me again why so many Indians chest thump for Russia online. I tend to wonder, because they grift you the moment they get a chance. They did the same thing with their T-90s. But anyway, All of this, well, it's the lead up to the main event. Now sit back, kids, for it is time for Kuznetsov. Admiral Flotta Sovetskogo Soyuza Kuznetsov. Yeah, they picked a very long name, what can I say? It is the very definition of Putin's Russia in ship form. The ship, often painted to look brand new, is the ultimate naval Potemkin village. Now, if you don't know what a Potemkin village is, it is where a country that is exceedingly shit, think North Korea, makes a perfect village or town in eyeshot of their enemy to appear stronger and happier than they actually are. Kuznetsov embodies this ideal to a T. In the modern world, an aircraft carrier is the ultimate status symbol. It allows you to project power all throughout the world and truly be one of the world's most powerful countries. The United States of America can famously appear off your coastline at any given time with one of its 11 supercarriers, and instantly have, in the case of nearly every single nation, a stronger air force than you, not to mention the power of a US battle group. When you do the math, NATO can deploy a total of 15 carrier battle groups across its member states. 15 full carrier battle groups with spare escorts. It is honestly just mental, the projection power that NATO countries have. Britain has 2 carriers that could theoretically form into battle groups. France has 1. Italy has a carrier, granted it's not as big, but it's still quite powerful. And that the US has 11. China has 2 carriers in commission, with another one being built, and then another one sort of on the stocks. We're not too sure how far along it is. India has a pair, and Japan has 2 destroyers that, well, not really destroyers, are they? You can't really call yourself a destroyer when you can launch F-35s, I'm just saying. So when you put all that together, it gives you the situation where Russia needs Kuznetsov to maintain its Potemkin facade of being a superpower. So let's go over Kuznetsov and regale some of the best parts of this Hellship's history. And I'm not kidding when I say Hellship, this thing is so bad that it would make my ancestors who came to Australia on prison ships blush. So Kuznetsov, let's start at the beginning, when she was stolen, because yes, Russia stole this ship. Following the KGB attempted coup in 1991 and the declaration of Ukrainian independence, the ship, built in Ukraine, being fitted out in Ukraine, was therefore declared Ukrainian property by the Ukrainian government while being in a Ukrainian port. Just want to emphasize that. Evidently, 2/3 of the ship's company agreed, but we'll get on to this. A Russian admiral from the Northern Fleet gave the order to the captain, however, to sail to Murmansk and join up with the Northern Fleet as a, well, then Soviet, but becoming a Russian ship. He promptly offloaded the 2/3 of the ship's crew who didn't want to abscond to Russia and stole the ship, sailing it incomplete to a port in a country that didn't have the facilities to maintain it, let alone finish it. 4 years would pass, and in 1995, the Russians, eager to try and dick measure and pretend they were still a superpower, sent the Kuznetsov to the Mediterranean to practice flying operations. From the 23rd of December 95 through to the 22nd of March 96, Kuznetsov made its first 90-day Mediterranean deployment, with 13 Su-33s, 2 Su-25s, and 11 choppers aboard. The carrier was accompanied by a frigate, destroyer, and an oiler, and was ordered to perform continuous flight operations until 2100 every single day. Given that the Barents Sea during this time of year basically has no light, it made a lot of sense to send the ship to the Mediterranean. It was the perfect location for the Russians to do this. The moment the ship passed Gibraltar, the freshwater filters proceeded to die, and the crew were limited to 20 minutes of water every single day. So 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. And the heating and air conditioning also didn't work properly on this thing as well. During this deployment, the carrier would lay at anchor off the port of Tartus in Syria, desperately trying to get things to work again before leaving for home. Admiral Kuznetsov would remain in port, preparing for another Mediterranean deployment following this one, scheduled for the winter of 2000 to 2021. This deployment was promptly cancelled due to the explosion and sinking of the nuclear-powered submarine Kursk. See my latest Russian Navy sucks video for more on that. Kuznetsov would participate in the search and rescue operation for the Kursk, along with the salvage operation, in the year 2000. Plans for further significant operations were postponed or cancelled, and the ship would make occasional voyages, with only one major deployment to the Med for the foreseeable future. This brings us up to September 2005. During a particular exercise, an Su-33 just fell off the deck while taxiing. It's not that embarrassing. Happens to a lot of nations, to be honest, so we'll let that one slide. Now hell would begin. Hell would really begin. From the 5th of December 2008 to the 2nd of March 2009, Admiral Kuznetsov made its third Mediterranean deployment. On the 5th of December 2008, the carrier and several other vessels left Severomorsk for the Atlantic for a combat training tour, including joint drills with Russia's Black Sea Fleet and visits to several Mediterranean ports. On the 7th of January 2009, a small fire broke out on board the Kuznetsov while she was anchored off Turkey. The fire, caused by a short circuit, led to the death of one crew member by carbon monoxide poisoning. Not even a month later, on the 16th of February 2009, the ship was involved in an incredibly large oil spill off the coast of Ireland. On the 2nd of March 2009, Admiral Kuznetsov would return back to her home port. The Russians admitted that they cocked up royally here regarding the oil spill, but naturally, being the Russian government, it pretended the oil spill was 10 times less than it actually was. I'm not even kidding, they pretended it was exactly 10 times less than it actually was. Until the British turned around and went, you know it's in our backyard and we can see it, right? In late 2011, the Kuznetsov would set sail for Syria on deployment, and this voyage was relatively uneventful until early 2012, when sailing to the Bay of Biscay on her way home. She broke down and had to be towed by an ocean-going tug. From now, Kuznetsov would not sail without having a tug at all times, so unreliable were the engines becoming. Now this unreliability, this is the thing that is talked about a lot with Kuznetsov. Where does it come from? Well, remember when I said they stole it? The thing about Kuznetsov is that flat out, the Russian Navy could just not maintain it. The Russian Federation is, and I cannot stress this enough, not the Soviet Union. It is not the Soviet Union in any way. The only shipyard that could effectively maintain the Kuznetsov once she was built was Mykolaiv in Ukraine, where the ship was built itself. So when she was in port, Kuznetsov, like so many other ships in the Russian Navy, would constantly have her engines running to provide the ship with power. The Kuznetsov ran on fuel so dirty that it would make Skid Row look neat and tidy, and it ran on this fuel because it was cheap. Basically burned her boilers out to oblivion, and they will need to be replaced. I want to contrast this to a country that uses conventional aircraft carriers, large ones, and that would be the United Kingdom. They have HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales. The moment these ships sail into Portsmouth, they are effectively switched off, and the port facilities are plugged in, like a big PowerPoint. Think about it like a laptop. When you're at home, you plug your laptop into charger. The ships are then constantly maintained, and this is the difference between a competent navy and the Russian Navy. Back to the Kuznetsov. So, this brings us up to the most famous deployment of the ship, the 2016-17 deployment to bomb ISIS. The deployment that signaled to all the Vatniks out there that Russia was clearly an uber mega power, and the deployment that signaled to the rest of us the absolute state of this carrier. It should be noted as well that Uncle Vladdy proclaimed this deployment to be his personal idea and took credit for it, so take from that what you will as we get into this. Kuznetsov set sail on October 15, 2016 from Severomorsk in the Murmansk Oblast for the Mediterranean, accompanied by 7 other ships including the cruiser, not battle cruiser, Pyotr Veliki, and 2 Udaloy-class destroyers. The air wing included 6 to 8 Su-33s, 4 MiG-29Ks, some Ka-52s, and a few other choppers. All the Su-33 aircraft had been upgraded with some bomb sights to allow freefall bombing, giving them a limited ground attack capability. At the time, certain analysts suggested that a lack of trained pilots restricted the number of fixed-wing aircraft that could be deployed from the carrier. These people were relentlessly mocked by Russia boos online. Hindsight tells us that they were correct. So this was truly the largest Russian military deployment abroad since the Cold War, and to try and show off the ships sailed via the English Channel. The Royal Navy responded to this affront by sending 2 ships of its own to escort the Russian warships through the Channel, probably also to watch for oil spills, but given the size of the black soot plume that follows the Kuznetsov everywhere, they probably weren't that hard to follow. By the 26th of October 2016, the ship was reported to have passed through the Strait of Gibraltar and refueled at sea off the north coast of Africa the following day. On the 3rd of October 2016, the carrier battle group paused off the east coast of Crete. On the 14th of November 2016, a MiG-29K crashed into the sea after taking off from the carrier. The pilot ejected safely from the plane and was rescued by a helicopter. So, the reason this plane crashed, and I'm not even kidding, was because it ran out of fuel while doing laps around the top of the carrier because the arrestor wires were so broken that they couldn't take the weight of the plane landing. The commander could have diverted the aircraft to land by at the nearby airbase, but hesitated, thinking that he could get the gear repaired in time. On the 15th of November 2016, as part of a large-scale engagement, Kuznetsov launched Su-33 strikes against positions of the terrorist groups of Islamic State and al-Nusra. Now, this was the first time the carrier had ever participated in combat operations, and the Russian Defense Ministry later claimed that 30 militants had been killed as a result of these strikes, including 3 field commanders. On the 3rd of December 2016, an Su-33 crashed into the sea after attempting to land on the carrier. Same reason, the arrestor wires just snapped. The pilot was safely recovered by a search and rescue helicopter. Later, it was revealed that the arresting gear mechanism again had failed to hold the aircraft, and it itself was damaged in the attempt. Following these two incidents of planes just being yeeted into the ocean, the entire air group was transferred ashore to Kemimim Air Base near Latakia to continue military operations while the carrier's arresting gear issues were addressed. The ship would later be ordered back to Russia following this deployment, her aircraft undertaking over 400 sorties. Although it must be noted, less than a quarter of these sorties were actually flown from the ship, and were instead flown from land-based aircraft. So utterly clapped out was the carrier now, they would enter an extended period of maintenance where she still is today. But our story doesn't end here, it just gets worse. Admiral Kuznetsov started an overhaul and modernization program in the first quarter of 2017 to extend its service life by 25 years, finally addressing the issues in the power plant and electronics according to Russian sources. On the 30th of October 2018, disaster would strike again with floating dry dock PD-50 losing power and sinking. Remember when I said there weren't actually the facilities to maintain this ship outside of, Mykolaiv, where it was built? Well, the one thing that could take the weight and to get it out of the water was this floating dry dock. And while this dock was sinking, a 70-ton crane smashed into the ship's flight deck, leaving behind a 19 square metre, or 200 square foot, gaping hole. One person was reported missing, this is Russian naval code speak for dead, and 4 were injured as the dry dock sank in Kola Bay. The ship was actually in the process of being removed from the dock when the incident occurred and was towed to a nearby yard. The cost of repairing the damage was estimated to be at about $1 million US. Now this is just the damage to the carrier, not to the floating dry dock. It was fucked. You'd think though, being that it was holding the glorious flagship, the dry dock would have a backup system. A generator, perhaps, with a fuel tank? You'd be correct in this assumption. However, two sources disagree here on what happened. Truthfully, they're both fucking hilarious, so you pick whichever one you want. Either the plant manager siphoned off and sold the fuel for money, or he never bought the fuel in the first place and took the money for it. 50-50, both are hilarious. In late May 2019, repair work of the aircraft carrier was again underway. That same month, it was also announced that 2 large graving docks in Murmansk would be merged and enlarged to accommodate the ship. The work would take about a year and a half. It had taken over 20 years since the fall of the Soviet Union when the Russians got the ship, but they were going to finally make a dry dock to fix the bloody thing. In December 2019, a major fire broke out on board the ship as work continued on the refit. 2 people died, and more than a dozen were injured in the fire, and damage was again estimated to be about $8 million. In June 2021, Vladimir Korolev, Vice President of the United Shipbuilding Corporation, announced that the overhaul and upgrade package of Kuznetsov was expected to be completed by the first half of 2023. In November 2021, it was reported that bad weather had caused significant delays to repair work, which might push back the completion of the refit by more than 1 year. Now, a fun thing you can do, and this is something the Russians seem to keep forgetting, is you can look up weather reports on Google, and I had a Google of the weather in Murmansk around this time. It varied between light rain, light snow, and about 3 or 4 thunderstorms. Must have been horrific if it stopped work. Must have been really bad light rain and light snow. The ship was finally dry docked on the 20th of May 2022. By the 27th of July 2022, the dry dock had been drained, allowing repairs on the aircraft carrier to commence. On the 15th of August 2022, the head of the United Shipbuilding Corporation confirmed that Kuznetsov would be handed over to the Russian Navy in the first quarter of 2024, and that the ship is expected to remain in service for at least another 25 years. On the 22nd of December 2022, the ship caught fire again. Fire was extinguished and there were no casualties. The aircraft carrier was then removed from the dry dock on the 21st of February 2023, although it was initially reported that the operation had been suspended due to heavy fog. The Russian Navy claims the ship will be back in service in 2024, but given the absolute state of the Russian military and, Russia as a whole, I mean, just look at the ruble compared to the US dollar right now to give you a kind of an indication of how Russia's going. I would like to take a comment from a previous video that I have made on the Russian Navy and apply it to the Kuznetsov. And this is from someone saying that either their close family relative or friend was a shipbuilder in the Mykolaiv shipyard. Just let it die. Now, the Russians have this wild and wacky supercarrier replacement idea planned for the Kuznetsov, the Storm. But personally, I don't think it will ever be completed, considering they're still building 2 landing ships that are set to take over a decade. And if they are all completed, they probably won't be. Odds are, well, what kind of state are they going to be in? Meanwhile, the Kuznetsov's sister ship, Varyag, she was about 60% complete when the Soviet Union fell, and she was sold to the Chinese. China has since completed the ship, and she is in service with no reported major screw-ups. Granted, it's the Chinese Navy, so you wouldn't know if there was anything, but still, Kuznetsov tends to fuck up massively in front of the camera. If Lian Lang is doing it, then it's quite quiet. The Chinese would actually even build a larger ship based on the Kuznetsov's lines, the Shandong, and she is still in active service as of today. They are no Nimitz-class freedom machines, but by all accounts they appear to be competent ships, and managed quite competently. Similarly, the ex-Baku in Indian service has had very few incidents occur, reinforcing the point it isn't the ship, it's the whole rotten structure. The Widowmaker, or more historically accurately, Hiroshima, imagine that nicknaming your own submarine Hiroshima, will be the next installment in this series. And I will probably take a little bit longer given that I have to explain something about nuclear physics in it, and I know, well, somewhere between jack shit and fuck all about nuclear physics from a scientific standpoint, so I got a lot of reading to do. This video was a lot longer than I normally make, so if you prefer the longer form video, please let me know. I am planning a Alexander Kolchak video, and it would be about this length, so if you'd like it in one part, happy to put it up in one part, provided it's, not an hour and a half long, because I'm trying to explain how a Slovak getting a rock thrown at him by a Hungarian leads to the supreme leader of Russia getting executed. It's the whole thing. We'll get onto it.